I am Janet Childs, Reverend Janet Childs of the Education Committee, and I welcome you to our UCM wonderful presentation, our educational series. And this is on the sacred masculine and the divine feminine, and how do we blend them together. And we have two incredibly wonderful people that are going to facilitate our time together today. We thank each and every one of you for being willing to come and be a part of this wisdom sharing circle. And it's my honor to introduce Reverend Chris Miller and Reverend Lynn Rogers, who are going to be our facilitators for this evening and are going to guide us on the way to blending the sacred masculine and the divine feminine. And I want to invite us as we all come forth, coming from our busy days, to take a nice deep breath and stretch your body. I don't know how many of you have maybe been on Zoom meetings, maybe for work or for other activities, how many folks have been, doing many things in today. It might have been a busy day for you. But now this is the chance for you to settle in, take a nice deep breath, and know that we in this moment in time are in for a treat tonight, because each and every one of us brings our own wisdom and brings our own experience as Reverend Chris and Reverend Lynn lead us on this adventure of exploring this very powerful paradigm that happens with the masculine and the feminine, and how we can blend both of those in us and make it come out to creating the best of what both energies can give to us. And so what I'm going to invite you to do too is, in these pandemics times, and I call them pandemics because there are many pandemics that are happening right now. These are unprecedented times. So allow yourself to let go of the day and the day's activities, of the hopes, the cares, the worries, maybe the burdens you've had to carry today. And we kind of imagine it being in a backpack. So the backpack is all of the past incidents you've survived, and also any present cares and worries that are on your shoulders. We're just going to invite you to take the backpack off for tonight so that we can be totally present. So how we do this is grab your backpack, okay? Just grab your backpack by the straps, lift it up over your head, lift it up over your head, and put it to the side. And put it to the side. And just by doing that motion, what we do is we're letting that backpack go for these next couple of hours, and we're allowing ourselves to be totally present to our own wisdom and to each other's wisdom. We have a wonderful tradition, and it is this. It is the lighting of the candle. And the candle is just the universal symbol of light and hope and healing. And before my brother died, he taught me how to make the origami crane. And I just felt like we needed this soft blue-green crane today for the candle. And we are lighting this in honor of all of your light that you bring, my friends, all of the light that you share and give to the world, and all of the light that we can be for and with each other. And so as we gaze upon the flame, just allow yourself to be reminded that you are a powerful light of healing, of comfort, of love, and of joy, and of peace. And that as we gather together and meeting together and sharing our wisdom, we then spread that light throughout our world. Wherever we go, we bring that light. And so breathe that in, my friends, and know that you are powerful bringers of healing and light to the world. And we're grateful. So take another nice deep breath, and I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Lynn to get us started. And welcome, 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 each of you. And I would just like to offer one more thing. We have found doing Zoom meetings in these challenging times that we've been in, if you can at all possibly put on your visual. We as human beings are visual people, so when we can see your face, that is very helpful, if that's possible for you to do. And of course, you always have the option to, not be visual if you don't want to be. But we just offer that it's almost like creating that environment like we're in person, even though unfortunately we can't be in person today. But it gives us that visual for and with each other. And so I would also offer that, our sharing today is being recorded so that other folks that could not be here will be able to partake of the wisdom shared. But just know that if any time you need to share something and you wish for me to pause the recording, I will be glad to pause the recording because everything here can be made confidential. So I wanted to let you know that if you needed to share something where you wanted me to pause the recording, I can do that. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, Reverend Chris, Reverend Lynn, and take it away.
Well, tonight we gather here. I see Vicki Wade from San Diego and Elsa Wyant from Pescadero, Lisa Wallace, Cheryl Paglia, John Simmons, and myself from San Jose area, Saratoga, and Chris Miller from Scotts Valley. I will draw in all the good healing energies that are available. I have just come through a time with my special daughter, and I too feel some of that vulnerability that we feel in these times. So I wanted to talk about how we've had stereotypes in our understanding of the genders, and even in understanding the energies within ourselves. Because we'll often say, well, I have male energy and female energy, but how often we stereotype it. And my graduate work, Edgar Cayce and the Eternal Feminine, was the first time that Edgar Cayce's Christian and a bit more traditional work was linked to the goddess tradition. But in recent years at the church, I was called upon to speak to a men's group, and the term in 2015 came to me, the sacred masculine. So I really think that in the work that we've done, say, actively since the 80s, to bring that divine feminine energy to the fore, it is now pointed the way. And it brings tears to my eyes. We don't have to conceptualize the men in our lives or our masculine energy in that old stereotype anymore. This is the time for the sacred masculine to be born. The Gnostics talk about the earth being made by Sophia, the mother of wisdom, and Sabaoth, the masculine strength. We need them both, whether that could be applied in relationships of a man and woman, in relationships of two people of the same gender who perhaps have had incarnations or polarity like this that they share. All of this applies and certainly is needed in our world. So I wanted specifically to address that in a new way and to lead into some discussion that Reverend Chris Miller will take forward as well about the patriarchal concepts of men and the sacred masculine, and what men too have experienced in that dichotomy. So in my book, I had a lot of creation stories from every race around the world that showed that the eternal feminine emerges in many cross-cultural creation myths, especially in the 5 races that Edgar Cayce, who was part of my graduate and personal studies, described in The Sleep State, America's Sleeping Prophet, as being equal, all coming when we angelic souls came into the earth realm. And it was time for us, after creating willy-nilly through self-will, to learn to align our creativity with the divine. And so we came into 5 racial gardens of Eden, each one of us like an angel soul, split into 5 parts. and those into two, the soulmates and the brother-sister souls. So there were twin souls, which is another concept that shows the important role of the eternal feminine, is the idea of twin souls. From around the world, stories arise of androgynous beings who separate into twin souls. There are also examples throughout history of the intense love and understanding of people who appear to be twin souls. So if we think again of the creation stories, where in each race it was thought that an androgynous kind of being made life. So let me just get to my, so if we look, for example, at, where are we, the races? Yes, the Red Root race. I stayed with the Hopi Indians when I was in high school at Pacific Alternative High School. And they talked about in their teachings a sun god and a spider woman who gave birth to life. Again, the androgynous aspects. In Africa, the mother of Elegba is so old they don't know her name. She is referred to as Nana Baruka, but that is not her name. She is a creatress who had twins. The twins mated and gave birth. So again, that androgynous element of these polarities, which can occur in physical forms, but also within ourselves. In the Yellow Root race, I love Kuan Yin. She's so beautiful. There's so many other sources, but she is the Holy Mother of Compassion, the merciful mother, but she's also called Savior and Savioress. Her compassion is not limited to the feminine. And that's amazing. So it's hard to believe I wrote this. I'm so glad I did. I'm looking at it and I'm so proud that it exists. And I want it to be available at our church office so that people who want to see it and enjoy it in some way that benefits our church can do so. So Rian Eisler, a more modern goddess scholar, and there were many emerging, particularly in the 80s, she said that the goddess worshiping matrifocal societies were gynocentric, feminine-centered. But they had fairly fully developed roles for men as well as for women. And so it's important for us to know that. In those days, the name and the line passed through the mother. The goddess cultures existed for 25 to 50,000 years, and they revolved around gathering people who lived more communally. But isn't it interesting that the Bible speaks about it? And I might be the only one who ever found it. So in Jeremiah verse 44, there are references to it. But before we get to that, I wanted to read a little bit of goddess material. I am Isis, the mistress of every land. I was taught by Hermes, and by the aid of Hermes, I set down laws for all mankind, and we ordained the things that no one has the power to change. I, with Hermes, revealed spiritual initiations to mankind. I compelled women to be beloved by the husband. I, with Hermes, ordained that truth is all of beauty. And this is in Egypt. So this is like Joseph Campbell says, this is a concept that is going around the world and through all of our historic periods. Even in mythic Atlantis, it's thought that by Atlantis scholar Jerry Steyer, who's still living at 89, that there were ages of Atlantis in which the feminine or the masculine principle took the lead, culminating in ancient Poseidia, which had many priestesses. Here's Edgar Cayce, a Bible-trained, prayerful man who in the sleep state, after deep prayer, begins to talk about priestesses and so many things. And when I was working on my thesis, it's pretty traditional in Virginia Beach. I had two ministers, Christ-based ministers, which was wonderful. When I came back to graduate, they were so kind to me that one of them found an excerpt in Edgar Cayce that no one knew existed. And I was able to put it in this book. Only those become conscious of same that have attuned themselves to that which is in accord or seeking to know his will. For each soul, every soul, should seek to attune its mind, its soul, yea, its body vibrations, to that he, the Son of Man, listen to this, the Mother God in Jesus the Christ, lived in the earth. Tune into that light and it becomes beautiful. In that you think, that you are, that you live. Edgar Cayce, reading 254:68. So he, trained in the Bible, in the deep state, spoke of how Jesus, whom he loved and revered, was showing the pattern of the Mother God. And I realized in doing this research that this was the masculine principle bringing out its nurturing, compassionate side. Just as, say, Mary, the mother of Christ and possibly his twin soul in the Atlantean land may have brought out her priestessly strength side. This is a sharing that comes to play. I think that the qualities, the archetypes really exist, but they exist in a different way than we think, where all logic and reason doesn't fall to one gender and all nurturing to the other or the archetype, but rather there would be a uniquely masculine way of protecting and nurturing. In the goddess societies, they had a wonderful archetype. Brother Moon, he protected the weak. Isn't he wonderful? Brother Moon, he protected the weak. I was just listening on YouTube to a story of a father, a single father, a gay father, who wanted to be a father. And he reached out and prayed, and he adopted a son from Indonesia, and he has become an Olympic champion. This was a man who embodies Brother Moon. He protected a child who would have been lost in his land, who had nothing and had been abandoned, and he was able to bring Brother Moon to fruition. So these are ways that these archetypes are already happening. And coincidentally, I was watching television this afternoon, and darn if Dick's Sporting Goods store, you have to hear this, watch this ad. They play the song of Miss America from the 1950s. Here she is, Miss America. And they have an Olympic wrestler woman grabbing and perspiring, and they're singing, here she is, she's so beautiful. And that brings that tear to my heart too, because we have evolved where we see beauty in diversity and we see beauty in so many forms. And that is wonderful for those of us that grew up with a very narrow idea of beauty, and it was so much imprinted. And I was so thrilled to see, swimmers, divers, and this wrestler. And there she is. A new archetype has been evolving with this divine feminine to the point I realized it's on commercials. And so, I saw that today. So moving along here, so Rian Eisler in 87 in The Chalice and the Blade talked about Gaelic partnerships ideals. I like that, Gaelic partnership ideals. But here is what women faced in the past. At the time of the French Revolution, Rousseau, who was supposed to be a groundbreaking thinker of revolution, he said this for women. For this reason, the education of women should always be relative to men, to please, to be useful to us, to make us love and esteem them, educate us when young, take care of us when grown up, advise us, console us, render our lives easy and agreeable. Those are the duties of women at all times. So along came Mary Wollstonecraft in the 1700s, and she wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women. And she said that reason is God-given. It isn't a gender-specific quality. She pioneered getting women away from only sewing for education back into being scholars like the women of ancient times. And so this is what the feminine principle had to move away from, the stereotype. And it's moving. And some of us were groundbreakers in that move, on some energetic level. So then I feel that this pointed in my book, where I later talked about after the way of the mother, I talked about future horizons. And that's where these Gaelic partnership ideals came in so many diverse traditions. I had a friend and a thesis mentor, Reverend Pamela Bro, whose parents were with Edgar Cayce at the end of his life, whose grandmother really helped Edgar Cayce's work come to fruition. And I sent Corey a picture. It may not be available now, but it's in my book of, I'll try to show it. This is, while my friend was preaching, this was her husband, John, bringing his child to the altar, his little girl, to take from the cup. And he said, "What I know about myself is my wife and my children are the most important part of my life. That's what drives me. That's what I'm about." So he falls in the category of men for whom the nurturer is a very strong natural part of his masculine character and his masculine archetype. So, so I will have much more to share, but I'm going to pass the baton for a moment to Chris with one lead in. That is that Chris and I each say that we were raised in families that did defy the stereotype. For me, I've been doing ancestry research, and I'm excited to find that I've had nurturing men, generations of them, including my grandfather, who came from England and actually changed his name honor to Rogers, took his wife's name because he was raising his daughter by himself and couldn't legally do this. So he changed his name to bring Winifred, his lovely daughter, to the United States. He hid that. It was a scandal in those days, called her his niece. But I knew this lovely man and his daughter, my true aunt, I'm now discovering. Then he raised my father in such a way that my father, Avery, who directed the United States Geological Survey for the Interior Department, would come home and vacuum and share with my mother the tasks of nurturing us. And then he taught my brother, my late brother David, who was a very big man. My mother raised him entirely. We all switched to Jackal Lane when he was born, and my brother grew to nearly 6'6". He looked like Paul Bunyan, actually looked a great deal like Chris, but bigger and taller. And he, when he had his son Daniel, he carried his toddler on his shoulder and called him honey and gave him kisses as he walked along. So now my son Daniel has had his son Dax, and it's hard to get pictures of Claire with the baby because he is carrying that baby like a kangaroo dad. So I learned that I thought it was masculine to be nurturing and protective like Brother Moon. And I went out in the world thinking that's how it was. And my mother was pretty fiery and creative and had a harder childhood, but had that creative spark. So when you grow up seeing something as a little child, it becomes real, and that's all you can see. It's hard to see anything else. So I wanted to open to you, Chris, and wonder about some of your experiences and what you would want to add to this discussion.
Okay, well, I'll just quickly add, in my family, when my parents were married, my father was off to war, and he was trained to work with his hands and create things. And my mother was the daughter of an engineer for Western Electric, which was the manufacturing side of the Bell Labs. He was a high-level engineer, mass produced the first transistors and assembly lines to manufacture things that created the communication systems throughout the United States and the world. And my mom was raised in an environment where she was not totally excluded from the knowledge, the information, the training. Was not specifically told she couldn't go to college. She went to the Jewish hospital and learned and got her RN, registered nurse degree, and worked as an RN and then an LVN, licensed vocational nurse, and Towards the later part of her career, she was the head of the cardiac care unit. So she was a high level employee. Both my parents worked. After World War II, they built a house in the Los Angeles area. And both of them were busy people. And I was actually born on my mother's birthday. She had been born on her grandmother's birthday in July. So we were both cancers. And my father was also a Cancer. So my youth was heavily influenced by the Cancer sign, which may influence me just slightly, I think. And anyway, my mom was recognized as being there. Some people, there's a stereotypes for the how would you say it? Some of in the sixth, I was born in 50s, in the 60s, raised. There was stereotypes of the family unit where the man did a job and would come home and put his feet up on an ottoman and the wife would serve him. Not in my household. I was the youngest of three boys, and my mom was given the respect and the dignity for her accomplishments, actually had more education than my father did, and was not treated as a lesser or less skilled person in that household. So I recognize that my outlooks and my upbringing were not what some people stereotype as a negative of the paternalistic household. And that balance, I think, is, to me, that should be the norm. That's what's expected, and much like Martin Luther King said, everybody's treated by their actions, not better or less than anybody else.
Oh.
And I wanted to go in tonight about a lot of these stereotypes, and I will quickly run over, I think this is from Matthew Fox, about what the archetypes of the divine masculine are. And he starts off with responsible, that the divine masculine is responsible and protective while being vulnerable and grounded. He's a giving and providing person who is courageous and action-oriented and solutions-oriented, which is interesting because this gets into one of the other stereotypes of the male being more logical and persistent and a boundary setter and steadfast. When I say persistent, I think that falls under steadfast. They have the strength of their convictions, which is a whole other area because you get into morals and values and all that. But those are more, I think, in the archetype versus what a lot of Americans have been exposed to is more the stereotype. Unfortunately, I think a lot of those negative stereotypes come out of the advertising. In the 60s and 70s, a lot of these commercials, they poked fun at people's in their roles. The comedians in that were always the joke. The guy'd come home and sit on the couch and watch TV. Well, that in reality never existed because nobody in those years had the luxuries of that. I mean, that we're a single father, a single income family could get by in the 60s and the 70s, but surely where our generation has come through there, nobody is achieving the American dream or middle class without both parents equally working hard outside of the home in order to achieve a financial level to come in. And I think this is further a stereotype that is being misused now in a lot of the advertising and such that, can you imagine a young person in this day and age, especially in Silicon Valley, being told you should be able to achieve a single income household where you provide for everything, which is not a realistic expectation, which I'd like to go into. I think as far as the balancing, I believe that the yin and the yang symbol is a great description of the balancing of the divine feminine and the sacred masculine, that these energies work together. And if you visualize that symbol rotating, you'll see that one responsibility and one side in the light or the dark will alternate and be in the other part of the symbol. And I think that that is a closer semblance of reality in existence on this plane, that there is a time and a place. Some people say there's a time and a season for everything. There's a time when the man has to be the one who has to step up and protect the family. And yet he is also being equally supported on the other side by the feminine. One cannot pursue 100% of one energy forever and not cross over and recognize the opposite and maintain a balance. And thank goodness for that. The advertising aspect that I brought into this, I really wanted to point out that I think that as a society with our media, and I say media like television, has promoted some real serious delusions into the expectations of a lot of young people.
Like the Disney.
In my youth, one of the things was, Walt Disney. My uncle and aunt lived down by Disneyland. And so as a child, occasionally we would get there possibly once a year. But there was the things about Tomorrowland and Adventureland that were fantasies there. But then you go on to a lot of the movies that they produced. Sleeping Beauty. I had this illusion of this white knight comes along and takes, or, how would you say it? Cinderella starts, she's scrubbing floors. She's doing menial labor. Her life is hell. She's a servant for these people that are horrible. And she is swept away magically to a life where she lives in a castle. She's surrounded by servants, never has to lift a finger again or do anything, that's in the movies other than putting on a gown and, looking nice for this prince who comes along, and he's perfect. And he's on a white horse and he's involved, and they're off on this white horse, and the horse leaves no byproducts. The horse does not have to be maintained. There's nothing to clean up after. And it's such a delusion that this youth are programmed to think that that's the reality. That's the dream that they're working for. Not of, as Lynn mentioned earlier, a professional athlete who exerts their energy and focuses in to achieve a goal, to do the best that they can do in any profession, things like that. That this society programs these people with these unrealistic expectations. And so they are set up to have disappointments. And whether male or female, masculine or feminine, there's this setup for disappointment. And I would really like to see if we could reset society to start with forgiveness of others for not meeting these unrealistic expectations, to allow people to be human, to fail, as the motivational speakers most go on to, you have to keep trying even if you do fail. It's okay to fail. You get back up and you keep trying. That it's not a lifelong sentence if you fail. It is a temporary setback, and you learn, and then you go on and you try again, and you'll do better the next time. This is the Olympics or the epics, the top. These people have focused their energies for life on understanding relationships and ourselves, the understanding the male and the female, the feminine and the masculine, and how they affect us all at times in our life. But I think that if we could forgive ourselves and others our disappointments and start with a clean slate and say, okay, as an adult, that was an unrealistic expectations. Yes, this person broke my heart, but now it's time to let go and do that. They did the best that they could. Forgive them, except they did the best that they could. I see things where, men are brokenhearted. A woman didn't live up to their expectations, et cetera, et cetera. But forgiving that and moving on, and then step back and look at these archetypes versus the stereotypes. And I enjoy a good comic. I love The Far Side, which is somewhat sarcastic and cynical on things. But if you laugh at it, I think it helps to take some of the tension off of the hurt or the disappointment that we experience daily in our lives, and to laugh and say, and go on and look at it in a positive light. If one has positive methods to move on in one's life, whether it comes from the MDI, Men's Division International, which is an outgrowth of the Sterling Institute, whether it comes from divorce recovery classes put on pretty uniformly by most churches now to help people recover from their disappointments, and that to come into a balance of the male and the female. Some have mentioned it in other countries, that in divorce, which was one of my experiences, that may not be that common for everybody, but I think that the legal intrusion into the process is, how would you say, a detrimental effect, because it becomes a competitive, who did the worst thing, accusations of the stereotypes of the feminine and the masculine. Our Reverend Fitzgerald, his daughter, she does services to help people in the dissolution of their relationships. There's all this buildup of expectations to go into a marriage, a combining of these two entities, each with their own masculine and feminine tendencies, a lot of it programmed by their upbringing, to come to try and blend their energies together successfully in a society which nowadays has all these visual external components thrown at it, is that are not real, in my mind, not realistic expectations. Even Dick Van Dyke, who was a great comedian, he mocked himself as a man consistently. And his wife, Mary Tyler Moore, was mocking herself, her characteristics, when these are parts of being human and emotional, times of not being totally in control, that I, in retrospect, do not think should be mocked so much, but endeared and treasured is the human experience. I've worked on some projects where things were brought very close to perfection, and yet in humanity, I think that the truly endearing things are the imperfections. otherwise, it's like an artist. Do you try to attempt to emulate nature in its beauty, in its perfection, and all the fractal designs and everything, or do you appreciate the imperfections of the paintings as you go along? Otherwise, you just throw your hands up and say, I'm not going to try and paint that. It's too complex. But
No, Chris,
yeah, and I see in some of Reverend Lynn's pictures that you're not trying to capture everything. You're trying to capture the emotion or the energy of that, which is a good, I think, aspect of how we need to be revisiting how we look at our relationships within ourselves and with other, partners, male and masculine and feminine, and how we approach each other. If we can focus on the divinity of the masculine energies, may not be perfect all the time, but brings things to the table that the feminine does not always. And within there, I think there is a divine balance. We may not see it all the time, but I think that's one of the areas in the future and now that as a church, we should be focusing our energies and bringing that balance in there. And that all starts, in my mind, with forgiveness.
Well, Chris, you lost your picture, but you stimulated so many thoughts for me. Do you mind if I chime in?
Yes, please. If you can hear me, please. Yes. I have to plug my phone in.
Okay. I wanted to just say that when Chris talked about, I wanted to say that in Edgar Cayce's material, reincarnation was a big part of it. Just like the early Christians believed it may take more than one life to come to fruition. You may not all hold that belief, but I do. And the readings suggested that even Jesus may have lived before in other experiences and other races. So that when Jesus in Christianity said it is finished, it was a many cycles and sagas to come to that point of that Christ compassion that he in these scenes manifested. But one of the past lives of Jesus could have been as an African man named Hermes, the Hermes that Isis spoke about, that she studied with Hermes. He came from Nubia, and in his astrology, which I've read at the Rosicrucian Museum, and I believe more than current astrology, he said water is a masculine element. Now think of Poseidon, who stirs the sea, and when there were studies of small children before society cramps, oftentimes little boys may cry louder and even a little more than girls. Also, when they did studies of 3-year-old children and presented them with caretakers of both genders, there was an even split. They wanted male caretakers and female. So Chris mentioned his mom went to a Jewish nursing school, was ostensibly Catholic, but who knows? And his mother brought to him some of the wisdom of Cayce, which helped our paths to almost cross long ago at one of Jessica's conferences. I enjoy hearing Chris's depth insight. It makes me think about other studies in brain research that he suggested I mention. We think of when we have this idea, and I always try it on my students, and I say, okay, if the right brain isn't, John already knows the answer to this because he's in the writing group. He could teach the writing group. If that we always say the intuitive side that has the right brain tends to be intuitive, spatial, mood up and downs, getting the whole picture rather than going logically directly to the point. The left brain tends to be logical, upbeat mood, language. It goes directly from point A to point B. When epileptic people sadly had to have severed in order to stop seizures, there was some gender in a small study. There were some gender leanings. Where do you think people went? Which hemisphere did they end up using? And almost invariably, because of, remember, Carl Jung defined these qualities. At the end of his life, he was starting to redefine them. And we've picked that up as metaphysicians. We don't know the source of it, which is what I'm bringing out. It actually ended up with more women on the logical linguistic side. Remember, I snuck in language and logic, and more men on an intuitive spatial. I stuck in spatial, which really, it was a small study, but it tells us that we both have both in different expressions. Some men and some women engineers very much specialize in a certain area of the right brain. And some women have strong connections between the hemispheres from centuries of having to hold a baby and and lead the people. So we've developed some traits, but each one has their own way of expressing intuition. It shouldn't be discounted. Engineers can be some of the most intuitive people. My late husband, Joe, worked for a company called Extensis, led by Samuel Holland. It was a group of engineers who decided when they couldn't figure things out to use pendulums. And Sam went on to be a VP at Apple. The Bible, I did want to I'm an information explosionist probably. Here's what I found in the Judeo-Christian Bible, which is one of the books of our church. So listen to this. Jeremiah 44, verse 15. Then all the men which knew their wives had burned incense unto other gods, translate goddess, and all the women that stood by, a great multitude, even all the people that dwelt in the land of Egypt, of Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, because he was talking against heathen and pagan people, and the women said, but we will certainly burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, our princes, in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, food, and we saw no evil. This is in our Bible. And then verse 18, but since we left off to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted for all things, and we have been consumed by the sword and by famine. 19, and when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings unto her, did we make our cakes to worship her and pour out drink offerings to her without men? No. So even the Bible retained the history of a time when the gender polar axis swang in a different direction. Did women as a whole keep from men some of the mysteries of birth? Was that one of the mistakes of those earlier cultures? Hard to know. But as Chris pointed out, such mistakes can occur in lots of ways. And then Chris mentioned the yin yang of Tibet. When I was working to discover this material at a time it wasn't very popular yet, I ran into a young man in a metaphysical gathering, and he had actually grown up and was schooled in Tibet. And he said, I want to tell you about the truth of the yin yang wheel. And I said, well, what is that? The dark is yin, female, and the white is masculine, but they have, as Chris pointed out, dots of the other in them. He said, oh, no, that wasn't how it was in the beginning. He said, the dark was for he who hunted by moonlight, and the white was for she who grew the grain by day. So I think we've had some gender polar axis shifts along the way. Our archetypes have shifted, and we're in another one now. The wonderful example that Chris gave of, really, to me, it points the burden of the man who has to be the perfect prince and save the woman from really the oppression by doing everything for her, and maybe being a success symbol. And if he becomes injured at a job or he can't go forward, his identity as a success symbol under the patriarchy is threatened. It was wonderful in Chris's case. He's been able to raise his sons more hand-on, especially their teen and later years, to almost make a wildlife refuge in his home, bringing out the sacred masculine. So I wanted to tell you, Chris, about this wonderful commercial I saw today. You must see. It just came out, and it's a woman in a tower waiting for the prince. And, and she does have an iPad. She's waiting for him to come along and save her. And finally she says, I don't have enough time for this. And she orders on the iPad what she needs for herself and gets out of the tower, or on the Apple device. So you're right in tune, because this is now coming out. When we we tune into an archetype, we've been discussing this topic. Isn't it interesting that it's manifesting just as we speak in the collective consciousness? So
Yes,
I know.
she sent her order out over the hair waves.
Oh, I see. Oh, the hair waves. Oh my God, that's very good. And so these kinds of archetypal situations can affect heterosexual, same-sex marriage. When everybody was making a big to-do about the honoring of same-sex marriage, I was in the middle of Omaha, Nebraska. Chris was there visiting some warm second cousins. I don't really have a lot of family here. And my second cousin, Valerie Cook, is very progressive and leads nursing at the VA there. But there was a couple that were really struggling with the concept of same-sex marriage because the woman said, well, you know, the Bible said, and so forth. And then she stopped and said, but then we love Jeff. And so I found people in the middle of the country, in the South, shouldn't be stereotyped either, because these are people, you know, working through stereotypes to which we've all been exposed. And I came back on the train and I thought, what if we could have the identical ritual and change one letter of the alphabet, marriage and parage? But I didn't. So, you know, that's how silly it is in a way, that we have these differences that can be resolved and harmonized through galactic partnerships of those principles active within us and active in our lives. And I know at this point, Janet encouraged us to open our discussion so that anyone can participate, ask us questions, share something. And I wanted to now open the discussion. So please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone. Elsa, are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Say hello. We'd like to hear your voice.
Oh, hello, everybody. I figured out I had to push *6 to get on mute. But welcome. I've been listening and enjoying all of it.
Great.
And Kathleen Smoot and Vicki Wade are on.
Yes.
They may be listening, and we welcome you here. If you want to take off your mute and say hi or show yourselves, you're welcome to, but not obligated to. I told them, oh, hi, Kathleen.
Yay, there she is.
Good to see you. And Vicki, are you able to do that, to unmute and to unblock your video if you want to? So the discussion is open. We're just really addressing tonight how we're moving from stereotypes, and we've been doing it for a number of decades centuries really, with the feminine, but let's not ignore that it's time for the sacred masculine to be honored and not to project the patriarchal stereotypes unduly, from which male gender people often suffer in this culture. Mm-hmm. So, and people who identify with masculine energy. So what would you, some of you have examples. John Simmons, I always ask him, he has an example because of his profession of some stereotyping. And I don't know if you'd want to share with us and how you shared today that you overcame that.
I actually have a couple of examples, and one of them that I think is interesting is we had a Japanese exchange student who stayed with us for over a month, and he was valedictorian of his class. He spoke and wrote 6 languages fluently before going to Waseda University. And when he left, he had to write a little story about what it was like living in America. Now, my wife and I don't have stereotypes on sexuality. So if the car is getting low on gas, she fills it. If the dishes need to be done, I do them. If the dog needs to be fed or the cat, or, there's no stereotype as far as what we should be doing. So in his little article, I wish I had been able to talk to him afterwards and explain it to him. He said, in America, I found out there is no difference between a man and a woman.
That was his article. Well,
that's great.
As intelligent as he was, he somehow, couldn't explain it any better than that. So,
could you tell us briefly your nursing story?
Oh yes. Well, I was in pre-med and decided I wanted to switch over to nursing because I interviewed 6 doctors and they all said, don't do it. It's an awful job. It takes everything from your life and takes all the time away from you when you want to be somewhere you can't be. It's very difficult. So I thought, well, what can I do to take care of people? So I could do nursing. So I went over to the nursing department and said, I wish to go through their program.
You don't have to race. I just share it. Yeah, I'm pushing.
Okay. And so the head of the department explained to me that she was never going to allow men in nursing. And if I tried to get in, she would keep me out. And if I did get in, she would make sure I failed. And there were several other nurses with her who felt the same way. So
Wow.
they were real clear about that.
Can you tell us some of the things, the length they went to stop you?
Well,
You
yes.
can share it.
Number one, they required that I get an okay from every head of every department in the school to transfer over, because I'd already taken advanced classes. So I had to go back and take the basic classes, which were required by their numbers. And I said, well, 30A and 30B are below, anatomy and physiology are below 118 and 119. So those 119 should count. They said, no, you have to take the basic classes. So that added about 3 years or 3.5 years to my time. Anyway, they were trying to just prevent me from getting in. And the director said, you're fat, and we don't like fat nurses. Well, she weighed probably 350, I think. She was big. And I didn't say a word. I didn't smirk. I didn't do anything. I said, I understand. She said, so we're going to weigh you in, and if you're over the metropolitan weight scale, you will not be allowed to matriculate.
Which is a low scale.
And they had three people weigh me in the day before to make sure that I was a half a pound under the 208 that's allowed. They did a lot of little nasty things.
What about the skirt? You got to tell us.
Okay, well, my wife was in this class, so you can be assured I'm not making any of this up. But anyway, there's one of the teachers seemed to get great delight in not wearing underwear and sitting across from me in circular rooms. And as she talked, open her legs and close them, and open her legs and close them as I sat across from her. Wherever I sat, she would make sure she sat across from me on the other side of the room. That was a little, crazy thing. But there was a lot of masculine, feminine stuff going on there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember which one you told you were happily married to, but they sure gave you a difficult time because their stereotype was that nursing was a feminine profession, and that you threatened that identity. Yes. And so what were some of your roles in the community based on going through nursing are astounding to me. You were directors of a couple of programs.
My first job at Valley Medical Center at inpatient psychiatry, the head nurse, Nurse Nancy, invited me into her office the very first day. And she said, Mr. Simmons, I would be very happy if every man on the planet died today.
Okay.
I said, well, yes. I said, well, I would agree with you 100% except for one, you should leave. But all the rest, it's okay with me if you want to get rid of them. And she just turned red. She sat there and just stared at me. And then she stood up and said, I think our discussion is over. Go back to work.
But you went on to become a director of what, neuropsych?
Yeah, I went on to become her boss's boss. Not too far down the road from that.
So I think it's really important that we talk about the stereotypes and some oppression that goes on as we stereotype men as well as women in our culture.
I'll just add two more things and I'll keep quiet. Two different times when I moved up in positions.
No, go ahead.
Two different times, not a lot of times, but a couple of different times, the women above me came to me and said, a part of moving up means you have to pay back, you have to give, sexually. And I said, well, I'm married and I'm a minister and I can't do that. They said, well, then we'll make sure you don't move up.
And how far did you move up? Can you tell us what your director said?
I moved up all the way to the top. In fact, the director of the county system wanted me to take his job when he retired. And I said, I didn't want paperwork. I wanted to work with people. So I was actually able to leapfrog past all these people.
And you had something in you that persisted through those obstacles. What was it? That's
true. I don't know. It's just persistence. I have confidence. Things will work out. There was a big battle going on in the county, in the VA, between two groups of blacks. And the director of nursing said to me, John, you're the only one who can fix this. I want you to bring them together. And I went down and started working with both groups. And within literally a week, they came together. Now, that was God working. That was not me. Because it turns out that one of the groups that was most violently against the other group loved my wife Rose because the leaders there had worked with her years before in a county, in a system of taking care of people on the streets and all that. Rose had worked there. and she got to know Rose and loved her. The other one was the one who knew that I knew what I was talking about and thought that I was there to help her. So both groups thought I was there to help them, and I was, and they came together. And the director of nursing called me and said, well, you did it a lot faster than I expected, but you did it.
That's incredible. One of the other stories that I'll just paraphrase for you, John, if you don't mind, was that, I mean, I have a special needs child, and I know we were all very concerned, fearful of where our children would end up in their future lives. And John was working at one point an award, I think, was that under developmental no, it was when it was mental illness focus, I think. Agnew originally was focused on mental illness, then developmental disabilities. When was that?
I worked
the
with
hygiene.
I worked with both mentally and development in different units, different wards.
Can you, so John told, and he can say more obviously, but I think it was during the period of mental illness, and there was, he knew other students, and it was a night shift he chose to take, and there were terrible, horrible conditions of sanitation, and no one wanted to go in the ward. It was gruesome. And he let the other folks go out and study and catch up. And he energized, he was telling our class today, he knew about healing, and he energized his hands. I mean, so his hands became encoded with energy, and he safely went in that ward in the worst of conditions and brought new methods of hygiene, that have really changed the system. So, this is, I think John's example, it really illustrates a lot that Chris brought up, the principles that he brought up. I wanted to, Cheryl, is it okay? Can I speak about you for a minute?
Go ahead.
Okay, because I here I am getting everybody's business, but I think that.
And after you do that, Lynn, I'd like to ask a question. So.
All right.
Okay.
Cheryl has my late husband, Joe, they studied hypnosis together before I even met him. And so our friendship cycles back and forth over a long period of time. But what interests me is her personal story. She married Manny from Argentina, and they had their son, Robert. Jessica gave him readings. And there was a point in their relationship, and, may I talk about it? Is it okay?
I guess so. I don't know what to bring up.
Here we go.
They both discovered that their orientation at that time was toward in the gay and lesbian world, respectively. And so they, as close souls, they have lived parallel lives to each other, continued as parent, grandparent, and Cheryl cycled through many different phases of her personal experience. I think that's such a beautiful story of either brother, sister, souls, or soulmates. Isn't that beautiful? So that's a soulmate story. And, we have a lot of stories today. And so I hope Janet has a question, and Chris may have more comments. So let me butt out for a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wanting to know, because this is just all brought up. I mean, John, I think I've met you. I was a nurse way back in the day at San Jose Hospital.
Yep.
And
I was there in the 70s.
You were a leader. You were a leader in allowing men to become nurses.
Yes.
And the wonderful thing about nursing, for the short period of time I did it, is that it allowed what you just said that you wanted to do. It allowed to directly help people in a direct way, where the physician often took the backseat role and just made the orders and, made the diagnoses, but did not get a chance to directly help.
It wasn't unusual to help the physician as much as the patient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And many physicians were amazingly grateful for that.
Dr. Kell wanted to always call me doctor, because before he would do anything, he would talk with me about it. and I said, no, I'm a nurse. And he'd say, but I want to call you doctor. I said, no, nurse is better. I said, Dr. Kell, everyone respects a nurse. How many respect doctors? He was so serious. He went, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, I will call you nurse.
Absolutely.
I was playing with it. Anyway,
absolutely. And I'm wanting to acknowledge what Kathleen Smoot has shared. I see positive trends in YA literature for breaking down stereotypes. This is so important. Strong female protagonists like Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games is just one example. John Green books like The Fault in Our Stars also has broken down stereotypes. So we can see that youth-oriented, literature is now moving to break down those stereotypes.
Right.
And so I'm wanting to know, where do you all find, and this is a question I have for all of you, where do you find the balance, the heartbeat of the masculine and the feminine inside of you? Because we all are both. And so, how do you see that? How do you experience it? How do you feel it? How do you know it? That yin and yang, how the yin and yang of it, how do you find it in yourself? How do you experience it in yourself?
And remember, we don't have to look at it stereotypically. We can look at it
Exactly.
more eternally. Just that's a great question. And if you wish to answer this or anything else, the
Janet,
it's open.
in response to Janet's real quick, one thing about in parenting techniques that I learned from the Love and Logic program in there, and they talk about, if in parenting, if your child's behaving badly, they say be specific about addressing the behavior or punishing the behavior and not the child's character. The terminology that is used in there. And I think it's also applicable here as we look at ourselves, if we self-evaluate, they don't use these stereotypes of that's the masculine, the negative masculine image, and say, well, that behavior is not befitting of the divine masculine, etc. And I think it's very complex that so much information comes about. How do we talk to ourselves about our behavior, things that we want to improve on, to not beat ourselves up, to be kind to ourselves, to recognizing the differences between the masculine stereotype and the feminine stereotype, and trying to use positive, as I'm sure Kathleen as a teacher is using positive reinforcement versus trying to destroy the character. And that's it.
Well, Janet, I can answer your question that when I'm trying to be a peacekeeper and kind of sort of sacrifice a little bit of my will for the greater good, I'm like my father. That's what he did. And so to me, strangely, that's the masculine. When I'm kind of, though, passionate and I'm going to fight for a cause and stand up no matter what, I'm a little bit more like my mother. And I realize, in answer to your question, that's how it is inside me. And I identify with him quite a bit lately. I am having to get through the pandemic by drawing on his strengths, and yet my mother's courage, is so important to me. So we're taking a fresh look at masculine and feminine tonight.
On her deathbed, my mother commented that she thought that as parents, her and my father had set unrealistic expectations of other people in their children, in myself and my brothers, that they had unrealistic expectations of what we would experience out in the real world. And
Elsa, are you online? Could you share with us a little bit?
Well, I was a wife of the 50s. When I was working, it seemed like we were equal, but when I quit work to be a mom and a stay-at-home mom, my job in my own mind was also to keep harmony in the home, and I would do anything to make my son's home and raising a happy time, and I put my husband on a pedestal because that's where he wanted to be, and it was my choice. It wasn't, I did it willingly, and it got heavy at times, but I probably had a lot of the masculine in me because I did everything in our home life, like even work with the county, go to meetings and make speeches, and but he, in his mind, he was the provider. He was a wonderful provider. He would come home, and actually, he was from the era where you could sit in your chair and get your dinner available for you when you wanted. And I was so dedicated, I guess. And I'm much different now. I've been a widow for 25 years, and I would not make him his life as pleasant right now, probably not because I wouldn't love him as much, but because I have changed so much. But I forget where I was going. Oh, I got so bad. I was even his morning coffee. I'd put a sugar in and stir it. So, and it didn't bother me. And my girlfriends now have all different ages, but the younger ones keep reminding me how crazy I was. And I can laugh at myself, but I did raise a wonderful son, and I did enjoy those years. I volunteered for lots of things. And being a stay-at-home mom, you could go on picnics and be a good mom. You could go swimming and be a good
Important
mom.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also did. Yeah, I also did a lot of volunteering, a lot of our finances, a lot. I held the boat steady, and but he did what he felt his job was. He did a beautiful job of it, of providing the money that made our life, brought our food and the roof over our head, and that was his stereotype from how he was raised, and also my stereotype from how I was raised. So
without saying too much, you were actually the executive director. You managed it. A bad job.
But Elsa, there's nothing wrong really when you think about it. If somebody's worked heavily outside the house with having their feet up, as long as there's a time sometimes when the stay-at-home mom who's exhausted from child raising gets to have her feet up, maybe later in the weekend, because both are working at jobs throughout, but it's in the shared time to help one another. And we're just exploring. We're exploring. Let's see, Vicky, can you unmute at all or get some help unmuting? We'd love to hear from you if you want to. Kathleen, did you want to add anything? I guess you have through the chat.
Money can sometimes be an issue. And very early in my life, I had a very excellent teacher help me understand that. And the way we did it is Rose and I each got paid the same no matter who worked or who didn't work.
I love it.
Yeah, and it really
beautiful.
It was very good.
Yeah.
Janet,
Beautiful.
how about you? Has this discussion stimulated?
Well, I'm waiting for Kathleen. Kathleen, you were going to share something.
Chris shared something about, in terms of like the behavior for children to comment, just on the behavior itself and, not their character. I have to say, I really was impressed by some of our professional development, which was, about making love and connection, like sort of reordering the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy and then actually just putting love at the base of the hierarchy. And sort of, just kind of starting, with your heart when you're communicating with students. And they were talking about situations where, this kid is not turning in paperwork. Well, come to find out, their family had to move, there was a divorce, the family had to move, and now the son has to, as a teenager, has to contribute $1,400 to the rent. And so it's like,
wow,
kind of coming in with conversation, rather than the hard line, like taking that time, like trying to figure out sort of what's going on with people. So I was impressed by that.
Well, that's a huge transformation, a huge change. And I'm so glad to hear that, because there have been, of course, many traditional stereotypes versus, and I love the way, Chris, you said this, stereotypes versus archetypes. I love that. That's something I'm going to take with me from tonight. It's like, how can we embellish and strengthen the archetypes, which are our natural expression, of who we are as a unique soul, but also as we are a whole soul, having both the masculine and the feminine,
In,
sacred characteristics.
in vain with what Kathleen said about the role models that she is seeing in these YA or young American books, and that is, you need the archetypes, the role models that we'd like to aspire to is a goal, even though in reality we're probably closer to the stereotypes at times. But having those role models that set the better way of being a human, and being human versus being a root of habit or whatever, leading with the heart, listening through the heart. I understand that the heart is a real part of our brain circuitry that we need to be more in communication with. And thank goodness we're in the time of knowledge where that's coming back into our usable tools of life. One of the aspects of the divine masculine, it is mentioned in here, I believe it's from Matthew Fox. It talks about the divine masculine having vulnerability. And I think that fits on both masculine and feminine. We need to have not always, is a Cancer, have your shell up, but be vulnerable, listen, to lead with the heart, get the communications, the feelings from the other part. And if I look back and say, well, it's critical. Oh, I use gas in petroleum in my younger days, etc. But being nice to ourselves and others where we've made mistakes, and learn and share the improved ways, the better ways of living, say for me in my elder years now, to share with the youth to help improve their lives in the betterment of humanity. So I look highly up to teachers in our system, in our world, is paving the better way.
You've been also helping the lives of many deer. Would you say, Kathleen?
A lot of conversation around just, how tough the pandemic was. And it was, it was just, one thing everybody learned is that online learning, while, obviously situations like this, it's very convenient, but, just overall, for classroom day in and day out, the students are going to be really glad to be back on campus, but the teachers are just, kind of, I think, taking a step back and working more on the what they call social emotional learning as well.
Right.
But realize they're going to have to feed more into that, just to kind of bring people back into community after having been gone for a year. So.
A pioneer in social emotional learning was Carol Gilligan at Stanford, who many years ago answered the psychologist Jean Piaget's premise that he had, which was that which had been followed for many years. In that, it was that the final stage, according to him, of maturing or becoming an individual is that you learn to sort of try to fight for your rights, to dominate, to have your way, to be that rugged individual. But Carol Gilligan wrote a book called In a Different Voice. She observed that women and girls in our culture, if in a sports game, might often, for the good of the group, they might keep the team together by not always pushing to be the winner. And she said, that's a different voice we also need for resolving world conflicts, that keeping connection, which was something that women had an opportunity to really develop in the culture, that was really an important voice. So that being the dominant one who wins can be important sometimes at the Olympics, just as helping the team win can be important. Recently, an athlete withdrew to help the team. Yes.
Having worked in psychiatry, I can tell you that over the years, I have been very careful to observe that when women are under stress, they group together. When men are under stress, they separate. That's very much true in many cultures, maybe all the cultures, I'm not sure. So when I was doing therapeutic intervention, I always kept that in mind as to what I was going to do to help reverse that or encourage it, depending on what would be more therapeutic.
And then sometimes there are loners in cultures of both genders who do it. But we can raise an open question. Did women learn to keep those connections, or was there something in their biological experience that helped? It's hard to know. But we're going to discover over time the unique strengths in each of the uplifting archetypes. And it's good to remember that we don't have to even define the qualities within us in exactly stereotypical ways. For example, Elsa was saying that she was out speaking out at the city council, so she might have a lot of masculine in her. I would say for that time, she was doing masculine role, but Elsa's ability to lead is her own. It's part of her own strong feminine energy, is what I think.
That's
so,
right.
So there's that.
Even in the group of women, there are leaders. So it's not leadership issues. It's the grouping together and separating out on other levels. It's not that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to honor, John, what you're talking about. This is so powerful, and I really feel the need to underline it. What I've seen in our work with the VTA shooting and working with the VTA workers in the aftermath is that is a natural tendency for the women to group and for the men to kind of tough it out alone. And what we've been able to do with providing support, kind of coming in from the outside, our Bay Area Critical Incident Stress Management team has been able to draw the men together. And we're actually tomorrow having a meeting where men are coming together that had survived the shooting. Being able to come together in a group and support each other and hear from each other and provide that giving and receiving energetic support.
And along that line for both, the I messages work the best, don't they? When you see something that's going on that you don't like, you don't say, I don't like that. You say, I'm uncomfortable with that, or I noticed that. And that really helps a lot.
I think what you've really brought, Janet, to our attention is actually a negative result for men under patriarchal stereotypes, because in a past time where men, as they might have women in another time, had that sort of higher status to show feelings or to show vulnerability was equated with the feminine that was given a lower status. So they were hurt by it because in trying to preserve that status, they actually were hard on their own bodies and minds.
Absolutely.
And that's where the patriarchal concept isn't as good an archetype as the one of Brother Moon, who's strong and protective with compassion, for the weak.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And I just want to offer, Kathleen said another, I'll just add about the teacher meetings that the male teachers contributed equally to the discussion about social emotional learning, which was so good to see. And thank you, Kathleen, because you're on the front lines with our teachers. And so you've actually seen it, in the classroom, in your group of teachers. That gives me great hope and gives me great encouragement. So any way we can facilitate, and just as you said, John, doing the I messages, sometimes what I'll do is I'll have the wonderful men, it's primarily men, some women though too, get connected with their spouses, the men that had survived the shooting, and I'll have them get together with their spouses and using I statements, say what their day has been like, and they just take 5 minutes each, and what is it that we need from each other right now to help it be a little bit more gentle and a little bit easier. And what that does is it creates the environment where we're then being with each other in an equal way and honoring each other's experience.
Just balances it a little bit.
Yeah.
Chris, you had a comment, I noticed. Chris? Where are you, Chris? Oh, okay. I don't see where Chris is. Okay, so we have other people who've come into the discussion or listening in. Patricia, Hal England. Kathleen, did you want to say anything about Janet's comment?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so we've been talking about stereotypes of the masculine and feminine in our lives, in our bodies, in our gender role in society and within ourselves. And we've been unlocking some of the early traditions in which some of those stereotypes were not as they are now. We've been looking to future horizons. So I'm going to see if Chris got bumped out and encourage.
Absolutely. And Patricia, may we hear from you? Warren, Vicky, any comments? Any thoughts about where you're aware of how you hold the masculine, the feminine, the divine masculine, the sacred feminine, however we want to put it, in your own bodies and in your own experience? We would love to hear from you.
You just brought to mind something that I thought was rather interesting, insightful, and cute at the same time. I was doing some conjoint therapy, our first session, with a man and a woman. They were from another culture, and they're from more of a rigid culture. And so while I was introducing myself and they were introducing themselves, and we were starting our process of building some trust, the man said, I need to let you know that I am the head of the family. I am the head. Talk to me. And the wife sits there quietly and kind of shakes her head. And I said, yes, well, I'll talk with both of you, but I do understand you are the head of the family. Yes. Okay, good, as long as you understand that. Well, partway through our session, he had to go to the bathroom. So he leaves. The wife leans forward to me and she says, Mr. Simmons, I'm the neck. I turn the head. I'm the neck. I turn the head. I said, I do understand. She said, good. Talk to me. I thought that was an interesting little flash of therapy.
Again, we're opening to discussion of.
I love that. I just want to honor that, John. I love that. That there was a moment in time, and I believe the universe created it so that he would have to go to the bathroom where you could, where she could let you know
exactly.
that he was the neck. And
yes,
and
she was waiting for a chance to remind me that the neck does turn the head.
Right.
So for people coming in a little later, I mean, sharing some concepts from a book I wrote. Where am I? Oh, there I am. Edgar Cayce and the Eternal Feminine, connecting back some decades the principles of the divine feminine, the goddess emerging from the goddess tradition, and pointing ultimately to the necessity to move also beyond the stereotypes with the masculine to the sacred masculine. We've been hearing John Simmons stories about reverse discrimination at work. Men can't be nurses. We've talked about Kathleen Smoot has been talking about how young adult literature is expanding our concept of the masculine and feminine. We've been talking about how even when we pick up Carl Jung's comment that we have these two energies, we have to forgive Jung because he was looking at men and women in his more 19th century culture to define what those qualities would be within ourselves. But his institute and he, at the end of his life, was saying that was initial work, that we are letting those archetypes too evolve in our understanding. So if you've come in later to the discussion and you have something now that you might like to share or to bring, to ask someone, or just talk about from your own experience, please feel free to continue to listen or to jump in if you would like to do so.
I just want to honor that Patricia has told us that she is not able to speak because it will reset her computer and her browser. So I offer that. Patricia, if there's anything you'd like to write in the chat, I'd be glad to read it, if that's a way you can communicate with us. Cheryl, what about you?
Well, a lot of things came up tonight. If you would have looked, and somebody from the outside would have looked at my upbringing, it would look pretty traditional. My father was hardworking and provider, good provider. He worked day and usually a second job. He did farming on the side in my earlier years. And then I also have to look that he was brought up in a family of 15 children. And most of the time it was just his mother there because his father worked on the railroad. And even even that way, there were more girls than there were boys in his family. So he saw women as being very strong and capable and handling the household and everything else, because she did farming on the side also, my grandmother.
Wow.
Yeah, so he had 5 girls before having a son. So he raised us like, well, there wasn't a difference. Whatever needed to be done, we did it.
Yeah.
We worked in the fields with him. We raised chickens with him. We worked in the house, but I did mostly things outdoors. So I was kind of the tomboy. But that's, so some people would even call us the Booker boys because they saw how hard we worked. And I'd say all 5 of us became workaholics.
Wow.
I only learned how to really relax in my later years because we always thought we had to be doing something. And then for my son, I remember when he was in first grade or kindergarten, he had to draw a picture of his family. And you couldn't tell the difference between myself and my husband. and the teacher had to ask which one was the mother and which was the father.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because we did the same things. I mean, he did more of the cooking than I did, but I did more of the outside work than he did, but we did things together and raised him together. So
Wow.
now he does the same thing. I mean, he can cook and and work outside, and so that's how you were raised. But even in my jobs later on, I did pretty masculine jobs at times. I ran a punch press at one time.
Wow.
Which was a huge machine, you know, and mostly men would run something like that. But I guess there wasn't much difference. And all of the 5 girls are very independent. And my brother, he's both also. He has a good feminine side and a good masculine side. Yeah, so.
That's true on the farm. We did female and male things and didn't even think about it. I would help with cooking. I'd wash the dishes. I would create the butter. I'd also milk the cows and pick up the eggs. There wasn't
Yeah.
masculine,
Never
feminine
had to
thing.
done, you did it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And every Sunday, my father did all the cooking because he wanted to give my mother a day off. So,
Oh.
yeah.
My father didn't do that. He went golfing.
My father never played.
He had a Sunday off too, but he went golfing.
Well, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much. That's
Wonderful
wonderful. And we've got Chris back. So welcome back, Chris. We're so glad you're here.
Thank
We've
you.
got to hear
Sorry
from.
about that. Sorry
Yes.
about that. Missed on some of that. There was one more point that I wanted to make out. You know, one of the things, I think it's under Matthew Fox and the others, about the masculine trying to find a purpose in their life. And I think that between the masculine and the feminine and the childbearing part of this, or whatever the term is nowadays for that, but bringing life into existence, the bringing a spirit into the body on this plane, is something that a male body, it does not do. And as such, I think that the feminine might need to be kind to some of the masculine and trying to figure out what your purpose is here, if that is the ultimate reason why you're here, is to reproduce on a, on a basic level, and you are the man and you cannot do that, that finding purpose might make a little desperation or craziness in trying to find that. I mean, it's the one thing if a woman, can sit back and say, I've got a kid and I've accomplished, right, my main purpose on life now. I got a parenting is of course involved, but if you're a man and you may not consciously think about it, but what is your purpose if, once you've done your part in the process? So
really, really interesting way to think. Freud kind of turned it around, and he thought that women envied men's bodies. But when I got to the root of it, he said because the woman would look at his body part and know that it alone could create children. And I thought, whoops, he had a jealousy. He was insecure in his role, so he turned it all around. Yep. Of course, it takes two, but that men have parts of their bodies. Interesting, like men have nipples too. There are some societies I've read about where a woman who didn't give birth to a child, but a child needs nursing, with the proper foods can actually produce milk. Yes. And there have been some in which a man has done so.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
right.
But is the parts of the man's body that better protect the vulnerability of the child, the mother, his ability and strength to protect for those that choose the path of child raising. But Chris has raised a big question. What are some of the other questions that you think we should look at this point, Chris, that we might not have touched upon?
Well, the one that I just mentioned, I think is really a biggie, and how is communications is, I think the biggest thing is between the two, and how we perceive, until you reach a point of enlightenment and you say, okay, you've got both masculine and feminine energies within yourself to balance this,
right.
That, on the farm, those luxuries are not provided the time. You have chores to do, you have to do it. It's only when we get to a point where you can sit back and observe the processes that you can start delineating between the two. And I think it all really comes back to being kind to ourselves for not being aware of this. You can step back and saying, oh geez, in this relationship I could have done this better, which is a method of improvement by looking back and saying, what could I have done better and how would you do it better? But as here we are as enlightened ones thinking about this, and yet when you're struggling to put food on the table, you're not always, really given the blessing of the time to think about the process that you're going through.
Thank you.
It's not relevant. You've got jobs to do, you just get them done, and then you're too sleepy to worry about it.
Yep.
And Chris brought up this, that, and Janet also, and the balance and the having the forces within us. In the twin soul concept, interestingly, my teacher Jessica would say, if you kind of imagine androgynous being, and then let's just say John and Rose were androgynous beings, if I could use them as an example, in twin souls, as they parted finally into two individualities. She didn't say that John took all the masculine and Rose all the feminine. Maybe he took 60 of the masculine and she had 60 of the feminine. But yet, and it's that symbiotic thing. So anyway, that your comment brought that up.
That's right.
Beautifully said. And when we take a moment and take a deep breath and acknowledge, all of the societal roles, the stereotypes, and then all of our internal knowing and knowledge of it. And it goes back to what you said, Chris, which I think is a very powerful thing that I think many of my men friends that I know are struggling with, is finding purpose in life, and women as well. But finding purpose that doesn't necessarily fall into a codified role, but allows them to express their own unique light, their own unique, incredible, beingness that they bring to the earth, and that they bring with their unique presence, and finding that purpose and being willing and able and being encouraged to be able to follow that purpose.
Well,
And Patricia said a wonderful thing. I just love to read this. I believe love is the basis to bring out the sacred in both feminine and masculine. Love, true love, brings out. It is the fertilizer to life's garden. Yes, yes.
That's a great idea of how we can better bring it out.
That's poetry right there.
And some of the things that Chris said about self-forgiveness and all of that would give rise to bringing your sacred feminine masculine out. That, Janet, you mentioned a purpose, and Edgar Cayce said, there are many of us who can live as long as we have a purpose. Oftentimes, the length of a life can be extended if we truly have a purpose. And that each soul had a purpose that no other soul could ever fulfill as well, to brighten that corner of the world in which we find ourselves. So we've talked tonight about the sacred masculine, divine feminine. I know that are we moving, Janet, toward our concluding time, or would we like to?
Yeah, we have a few more minutes, please.
A few more minutes. So whatever. Chris may have something more to say as we conclude our part, and you may have something more to say.
Well, in conclusion, I think Patty hit it on the head with love. How we interact with others and ourselves should be in conditions of love. By expressing love, we will get more in return. And expressing love within ourselves of the masculine and the feminine energies towards each other, the understanding. This life is full of so much misunderstanding, miscommunications, that if you can be quiet and feel the love and express the love first, the results will be better. And thank you, everybody, for attending. Lynn?
Thank you.
Absolutely. And, as we move towards our conclusion, I would just like to offer that we breathe in what Patricia and what Chris have just shared with us in those beautiful words, that we breathe it in, that love for ourselves and our love for all parts of ourselves, for all ways that the masculine and feminine is expressed, in all ways that the masculine and feminine is made a powerful source of healing, compassion, forgiveness, love, joy, and incredible life that it gives it. When we embrace all of us, when we embrace every part of us, what energy and strength that gives to us to respond to a world that so desperately needs all of our fullness.
I'd like to add to that, Janet, if I may, that asking each person to take a healing breath, to breathe in the light of the Mother, Father, Creator. And as we learned today with John's healing method, to exhale some of that love into the world that so needs it right now. Taking in a breath and exhaling, not diminishing, but expanding the love and the light within us as we send it to so many who have suffered oppressions because of gender, because of race, because of being an animal, to the planet itself. And in place that we bring the light, the shining Mother, Father, Creator of all, within and without, with each closing breath. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
To be.
And feel that energy circulating that Lynn just invoked so beautifully. Feel that energy circulating throughout every cell of your body, that we are all one and that we all have great capacity. Great capacity.
And thank you all for coming. Some of you I know who've come at a distance. Thank you for sharing your energy with us, whether your voice was heard or your picture. We know you're present. And I just am so glad to share with you. Again, as is Chris and Janet and our wonderful Universal Church of the Master Church. Blessed be, go in peace.
And, I would just like to offer to you, of course, this is going to be recorded. This has been recorded. And we invite you, if you would like to make a donation to the Universal Church of the Master, we would love that. And we will have this recording available on our website in a few days so that you can take advantage of it, share it with your loved ones, your friends, your coworkers, so that it can give a little bit of hope as it moves out into our world, and that we can have these meaningful conversations.
I would like to donate some books to the Universal Church of the Master, to the office, so that people who would like to either get or borrow a book may do so with benefit to the church. And it's a great reference book that really traces a lot of this activity. So thank you for the opportunity for Chris and I to share with you tonight. It's really an honor to be here again.
Absolutely. And does anyone have any last thoughts or wishes or hopes before we go?
Chris wrote, love to you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and be kind to yourself. Yes, Chris.
Thank you.
That's right there. That's the message.
Blessings to everyone.
Be gentle and do something fun and life affirming for yourself. That's your homework assignment. We're letting you out about 5 minutes early, so do something fun and life affirming.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Is that allowed now?
Will do.
Are we allowed to
You're grounded.
Absolutely.
It's good to see everybody's face, and good to hear laughter and see smiles and the positive words and everything. It is very encouraging to me. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris.
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn, for inviting us to this feast of wisdom.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you all.
Good night. Blessings to everyone.
Blessings.
Good night, and thank you.